Welcome to part 2 of our interview series. We're going to be talking about interview questions today. My name is Jesse. I'm an employment specialist. Shout out to our host, Works4You Employment. Let's get started. So today's questions, we're going to be talking about questions that employers ask to get to know you, to assess your skills and your weaknesses and your strengths, questions about your job application, behavioral-based questions, situation and scenario-based questions. We're going to talk about how to handle illegal questions and questions that I should be asking the employer. So the first interview question that's normally asked is a question to get to know you. And generally it's the tell me about yourself question. As a recruiter, I didn't really ask this question too much because when I did, people would give me bizarre responses. They'd tell me about their childhood, or they would start telling me about their family. And great responses for the question outside of a work context. But what I started to ask instead was, tell me about your professional journey, because that's what I really wanted to know. Now, there's a number of ways that you can respond to this. You can bring up your elevator pitch or your 3-point intro as discussed in our networking workshop. You can also go to your why story, which I discussed and showed you how you could do that in our cover letter workshop. And you can go from your professional profile and bring out key points from the beginning part of your resume. All of these work very well for this particular type of question. The next type of question is all about assessing your skills, your strengths, and your weaknesses. So it's a much more of a deeper dive than the tell me about yourself question. So you may hear a question like, what is your greatest weakness? Or what is your greatest strength? Tell me about an achievement that you were most proud of. Do you have any experience using software or a particular tool or machine or analysis, etc.? This may have a lot to do with what's in the posting and depending on what the employer is looking for. So we'll do a really deep dive into the greatest weakness question because as an employment specialist, I find that most people have difficulty with this question. And I'll illustrate why most people have issues with this question in a second. But for now, I just want you to take a second and think, how have you answered this question in the past? What have been your common responses to this question? Or what advice have you heard generally people tell you on how to answer this question? So here are some responses that are very common to find over the internet, are extremely overused and cliche. And if you use them, many times the recruiter actually suspects that you're lying, partly because they are so overused. Imagine hearing 8 out of 10 interviews asking this question, you hear this response. I'm a perfectionist. I'm too detail-oriented. I have a hard time saying no. I have no idea when to quit. I work too hard. You know, it comes off as being very fake, and that in preparing for this interview, you went to Google. That's what hearing this response feels like from the recruiter end. So even if you are a perfectionist or you are too detail-oriented, please don't use any of these responses because it's really, really, really overused. I cannot say that enough. So how do we respond to the greatest weakness question that doesn't sound cliche? Well, I'm going to give you what I refer to as the swim model. And yes, I've already been told the joke. And what the swim model is it's this. You want to start off by talking about a strength, go into a weakness, then talk about its impact and how you manage it. Now, when you're talking about a skill, it's a skill that you use to get around your weakness. The weakness that you use, you want to be relatable. So it's something that should be fairly common to people, something that other people would get immediately. And we'll go over a few of those. You want to talk about how it could potentially impact the job. So you are self-aware of not just yourself, but how this might impact the work. And that's when you close out with your final point is management. This is how you use your strength to mitigate your weakness so it doesn't impact your work. So I'm going to go over a few examples, but I'm going to start off with this one, remembering names to faces. So I tried to be an organized person because sometimes I have an issue remembering faces to names. Have you ever walked into a room and you just can't put the face to the name? You know the person, and you know the face, but you can't put the two of them together. This can be an issue because if you're at a conference or a job fair, you don't want to have that awkward moment where you don't know who you're talking to and you want to talk to them by name. So, and I don't want people to think that I'm forgetting them intentionally. I want them to know that I care. So before I go into meetings or to conferences, I'm always very diligent about checking my LinkedIn account, thinking about who might be there, so that when I do walk into the room, I'm able to recall who's there. And this is why I'm so diligent at adding people to LinkedIn and keeping notes on my LinkedIn account. Now, see what I've done there is I spoke about being organized, having a systematic way of going about doing things as a strength. Then I spoke about the weakness and I made it relatable. I said, have you ever walked up to a person and you just can't put the face to the name? So I've immediately potentially made the interviewer recall a moment where they had an embarrassing issue. So they're much more likely to empathize with the situation that I'm going through with this example. Then I spoke about how it can impact the work. And then I talked about how to use my systematized process, mainly adding people to LinkedIn and being very diligent about notes, to get around my weakness of can't remember faces to names. So here is another example, fear of public speaking. I try to practice before doing presentations because sometimes I get nervous when I'm public speaking. I feel it is important to be confident when public speaking to ensure that my point gets across effectively, which is why I have been regularly attending Toastmasters. So in here, they illustrate that practice makes perfect, and also practice helps out with anxiety or nervousness, as the person puts it, and that this can impact someone's delivery when they're making a presentation. So they're taking extra steps and practice to make sure that they deliver a good result. And here's my final example for today, being new to a field. So I've been taking extra courses, doing informational interviews because I am new to this particular field. This means I might need a little bit extra time to learn a few more things and to get really proficient at my work. To get around this, I've been looking on how best to apply my transferable skills in blank and blank. I have been looking at getting a mentor. Once I'm up and running, though, I should be good to go. This is an excellent response because the weakness is being new to something specific. We've all been new to a field at one point or another, so it's instantly relatable. The strength that they're using is getting information and learning. So again, the strength is what's being used to mitigate the weakness. They're saying it's going to impact the work because they might be a little bit slower, but they're also saying that this is a temporary issue that will go away with experience. So again, really good answer. The next type of question are questions about your application. So this is about the mechanics of how are you going to work for the company, why are you interested, and what you can offer. Why should we hire you? Why are you interested in our company? Why do you want to leave your current job, or why did you leave your last job? Why are there so many gaps in your resume? Why have you had so many jobs in the past few years? What were the major responsibilities at your last job? What are your salary expectations? How do you feel about shift work or overtime? Are you okay with traveling or relocating, or in our day and age, working from home? What is your availability? These are all great questions and really help the employer understand, are you a good fit for this role? So one question that sometimes people struggle with is, why should we hire you? And the reason a lot of people struggle with this is why questions are inherently harder to answer. So you want to shift your thinking with this. So when you're looking to answer that question, you want to talk about what is it about you that makes you a match for the job. So you want to talk about your match, you want to talk about your passion for the role, you want to talk about skills. A really good tool for making this comparison is from the resume workshop where we talked about the T-bar method, where you take the job posting, put it on one side, and on the other side, you write down or record what your match is to that role, point for point, and then use that as a checklist for your resume. So if this is a question you generally struggle with, you might consider adding the T-bar to your interview toolkit and bring it along with you to the interview. Why did you leave your last job? This can be a very difficult question to answer, especially if the job didn't end on a positive note. So you want to consider a few things when responding to this question. The main idea is to respond by pointing to factors that are situational and positive, but not negative. So was your job a contract job? If it was, the contract ended, plain and simple. What was the official reason for the contract ending or for your employment to end? Many employers in this day and age are hesitant to write terminated for cause on many positions that they close out. So you want to look at what was the official reason. Did they say laid off? Did they say services not required? So you want to look at the actual reason that they put in paper, because that was the reason that the contract ended. You can also point to other things that are going on in the company. Did they terminate a whole bunch of people at the same time? So were there layoffs? So you want to take a look at factors like that. Did COVID-19 start? There's another major factor. If all else fails, you can talk about what you did after you were laid off. So did you have obligations like take care of a family member or take care of children? Did you decide to go back to school or get additional training? Did you decide to switch careers? These are all viable options for answering this question. So, how did you get along with your last boss? This is a great question if you got along, but what if you had issues with your last boss? So here's your approach. You should focus on the silver lining. Reframe situations to talk about the benefits rather than your thoughts or feelings. So here's an example. My last boss was a micromanager. They didn't trust me to do my job properly. You can reframe that to say, my last boss was focused on training the team to do a better job. They took extra time to work with us to develop the team and teach us the ins and outs of the job. I actually got this one from a client. I thought it was a brilliant response, but it really does focus on the positive rather than the negative. So the help might not have been wanted or warranted, but they still provided it. So again, focus on things that are positive and not negative. Next is behavioral-based interviewing questions. You always want to respond to these questions by using a star story model, which we will get to in just a second. You can always spot a behavioral-based interview question when they start off by saying, tell me about a time when you, and then fill in the blank. So it could be a question that explores your customer service skills. So it might be, tell me about a time when you dealt with an upset customer, or explores your communication and sales skills. Tell me about a time when you had to sell an idea, or tell me about a time when you worked alone or had to prioritize. So depending on what question is, you can see what kind of skill they're looking for you to articulate. So this is the STAR story model, which is an acronym that stands for situation, task, action, result. You want to describe the situation that you were in, the task that you needed to do, what actions did you actually take, and what were the results from those actions. This line of questioning is meant to show past behaviors, and the theory and understanding is that if you've done something in the past, you will likely do it again in the future. So situation, you want to describe a situation and then the task that you took to accomplish it. You want to be specific in the situation that you pick. It can't be generalized. You want to give enough detail so that anyone who's listening, employers especially, can understand the story. This situation isn't necessarily limited to a previous employment opportunity. but could be from volunteer, could be from an experience that you had, a school project. Basically, any relevant event will do. When it comes to actions, you want to describe the actions that you took, and you want to be focused on your part. Even if you were part of a team or a group, you want to describe what you did, not the efforts of the team. That can be part of the story, but this is a story about you. And finally, the result. What happened? What was accomplished? If it was something that didn't go well, you can still talk about things that you learned. Really good star stories are short, effective, and to the point. Here's a real-life example of a great star story. Question: tell me about a time when you had to use critical thinking skills. Answer: while I was working in the grocery department for apples, bananas, carrots grocery store company, our store had movators that took shopping carts from one floor to another. And on the busiest day of the year, which happened to be between Good Friday and Easter, and just for a smidgen more of context, in the grocery store industry, both Easter and Good Friday, the store is closed. So this is the day in between. So it's very busy. All but one of the movators died. So they started pulling store staff to come pull carts up from one floor to another. And this was a losing battle. So I took the problem and redefined it. Instead of moving the carts between floors and pulling them up the movators, what was needed is to move the groceries from one floor to another. So I suggested a change of strategy to our manager, and we began to have staff carry groceries down the movators, with one staff at the top collecting carts and another staff at the bottom to bring carts so that customers could take the groceries to their car. We took this opportunity to show our customer service. We made jokes with customers. We joked about it being Murphy's Law. Everything that possibly will go wrong at the worst possible moment. And as a result, we had customers laughing as they left the store. We did have a few complaints, but we also had just as many, if not more, compliments from customers, because our customer service really had an opportunity to shine. Now, I want to stop for a moment and point to some of the really good elements of this. So in this story, I gave a setting, grocery store department. I illustrated what were the essential parts within the grocery store. So I talked about the movator, I talked about when this was, and I talked about what was the problem. All the movators died, and we needed to carry carts up the movator. Then I spoke about what I did, which was redefine the problem and make suggestions to management. So that's the action. And we, as the team, did good customer service. And as a result of the suggestion that I made in combination with our customer service, we actually had a really good day despite things going wrong. Next are questions that are situational or scenario based. And this actually tests your ability to problem solve, and you're evaluated more on your line of thinking. It's often based on situations that will arise on the job. For example, what do you do if you see a customer or employee cheating or stealing? What do you do? A team member is working slower than normal, which is putting you and your team's work behind. What do you do? It's time for you to go on break, and another employee decides to take their break out of turn without consulting you. Do you stay on the job? Do you go to your manager? What do you do in that situation? And so forth. So let's talk about illegal interview questions. Now, let's be honest, hiring managers are not HR professionals, so they don't always know that the question they're asking is illegal. So what is an illegal question? Well, they're questions that violate your human rights under protected grounds, which could be found on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But there are exceptions to this rule, and here are just a few of them. So it's not an illegal question if you're being opted into a diversity program, which is considered to be a benefit, especially for people with disabilities and various other protected groups. So if there's a perceived benefit to disclosing this information, it is not an illegal question. Bridging programs. So again, sometimes there's programs to help foreign trained professionals come over into Canada and get some work experience. Again, not an illegal question because it's not a violation of rights, it's an asset. Religious organizations, youth programs, and roles that are gendered required, or roles that have lived experience. So there are situations when you want someone from a particular group in that role. The best way to respond to a question that you perceive might be illegal is to ask a question. You want to be non-confrontational and you want to refocus it back to the job. If it's one of these questions that's considered an asset, you will find out very quickly and it shouldn't be a big deal. So how do I respond to illegal interview questions? Well, first things first, do not blame, do not call them out. This is counterproductive, and it's actually one of the fastest ways how to lose an opportunity, especially if it's a minor issue. So you want to respond to this question with a question, because normally, especially if there's an illegal question, generally there's an assumption behind the question, and you want to make sure that you address that concern and not the question, because you're just leaving them to continue to assume what they're assuming. So here's an example. Interviewer, do you have any children? Candidate, I want to make sure that I'm addressing your concerns as it relates to the job. Can you give me some more context as to why this question is being asked? Interviewer, well, this job requires a lot of work from home, and we want to make sure that there will be minimal disruptions in your house to your work. Candidate, well, I've already been working at home for several years, and I care about putting forth a quality performance. So I've already taken steps to minimize distractions and will continue to take steps to minimize distractions as they become apparent. In this situation, they didn't address whether or not they had children, but they did address that they would deal with disruptions if they arose. So they actually answered what the employer's main concern was, as opposed to an assumption that the only issue there is children being a distraction. So again, very important distinction. Questions for the recruiter. When we are going to be asking questions of anyone who's interviewing us, it's important that we have an understanding of where they fit into the recruitment process. Staffing recruiters, for example, don't actually work for the employer, but you can get all kinds of information on what they know, and that can help you later on in the process. So questions about how often have they hired for this particular company? What is the recruitment process? Now, if the recruiter does work for the company, right, you want to ask questions about corporate culture. What do they love about working for this company? What attracted them to this company, and why do they stay? What is the general career path of people who have gotten this role? Which is basically another way of asking, is there a way to advance in this role beyond this position? You want to ask 3 types of questions when you're interviewing the hiring manager back. So it's important to note that this is for people who are actually making the hiring decision and not a recruiter. So the first section is called Relate, and you want to ask questions that dig up their passion. So things that they enjoyed about the company, or what was their passion for joining the company in the first place. So these are things that you can tap into. Reveal. How did this position become available? Who is your top performer and why? What is your department's greatest challenge, and how does my role help overcome it? How do we know that I'm making an impact? So how will my performance be measured? This set of questions is all about finding other areas within the job that you can talk about that will really set you apart as a candidate. So you're looking for deeper levels of need that you can address. And finally, review. Is there anything that you think I failed to address? In the other workshop video, I spoke about recruiters and hiring managers generally not giving feedback after the fact. This question is really realistically the last ditch effort to find out information about how well you did in the interview. It's also a way of saying, is there anything that you feel like I need to talk more about? So it's an opportunity to save an interview if it's not gone well. So in summary, we talked about tell me about yourself. We talked about the greatest weakness question. We talked about other questions that have to do with your application. We've dove into behavioral-based questions, situational-based questions, scenario questions. We've also talked about how to handle illegal interview questions so that you can still remain competitive for the job. We've also talked about questions that you can ask the employer to get additional feedback as well as information that will aid you in both the job as well as during the job search process. That is the end of our interview question workshop. If you haven't already seen our interview preparation workshop, please check out the link in the description below. Thank you to our host, Works4You Employment. We'll see you next time.